All right, everybody. Welcome back to episode 6 on Thursday, January 8th. Thanks for tuning in. I brought the microphone back up to my face because it's really loud in my building currently. There's live music downstairs, so let me know if you can hear that. I've never... Oops. Let me know. I think the levels of the mic are okay if I'm here. And it hopefully is dampening the ambient noise, or at least it's not too distracting in contrast to my voice. Let me know if anything needs to go up or down. I'll turn my mic down a tiny bit because I got used to not being so close to it. Cool. Thank you. Okay, well, today I want to open with a quote that I'm using earplugs again for the second time ever, so that's a little weird for me, hearing my voice inside my head like that, so yeah. So I might just kind of be distracted, because it like, the headphones kind of like go in and out, and my voice gets like there's like a drastic change in my voice. Anyway, so a friend shared this with me earlier. I want to open this with a quote of something that was overheard in New York City, just walking around in New York City. She didn't say if it was on the subway or not, so it's a very, very brief dialogue between two people. And they said, I feel like my inner world is like, not lush. Why? I don't really have fun things to think about. So that's our live report from the death of the interior mind of our civilization, the participants in our civilization. So I thought that was pretty funny. Well, also, I mean, it's sad, but but it's funny. So, all right. Today's topic is okay. Awesome, cool. Good feedback on the volume. Solid. So, yeah. So today I'm gonna do something a little bit different. This is not necessarily. It's not really gonna be like the plan's not to be a news show or current events show. The purpose of the show is to develop a better understanding of what's going on in our world. So, as things do unfold in the world around us, we are going to, we can use all of these events to help us understand our position in the world and what we should be doing and what we can be doing. So, yeah, all right. So I guess I'll just get into it. So the two main topics are the protests against ICE in the United States, because there was a really very extreme killing in Minnesota where an ICE officer killed a woman who was driving an SUV. And yeah, so there's that. And then also, meanwhile, in Iran, there have been anti-government protests going on. And that's something you've maybe heard about, because some people in the U.S. comment on that, whether they are political pundits or news people or just individuals who feel an affinity with a global... I think these people see themselves as having an affinity with it, like global liberation movements. And so I kind of want to dispel that myth entirely. And, you know, I'm still just getting used to this, so I'm not going to be necessarily right about everything I'm saying. I'm not going to be necessarily as clear as I want to be about everything that I'm saying. I'm just going to start saying it so that as time goes on, as I keep doing this show, I can better understand what it is that I really feel about these events and what I feel to be true about what's going on. So I think before I really talk too much about any of the specifics of either of those protest movements, I want to just talk a little bit about our position in this world. And at some point, I might do this earlier on. I kind of prefer to save the readings for later on in the show, but there is a reading that I think is interesting in light of all this, and I think I have to preface the protest talk with that reading, because it's kind of more about the world that we're living in. So, yeah, and that concept that I want to explore is that we ourselves live under a repressive or authoritarian or totalitarian regime. I really don't like most of those words. I think actually the conceptualization of totalitarianism in the early 20th century by thinkers like Hannah Arendt, I think it has been very misleading because it mostly focused on regimes that were authoritarian in a manner that had a clear figurehead with a clear ideology that was like imposing a way of life on the people that involved in integration of that ideology with their existence. So think Stalin, Mao, Hitler. But I think it overlooks the already underway propagandization that has been going on in the Western countries for a long time, and specifically the United States. I mean, that's where I have the most information, because that's where I am. And so, yeah, so I like this book, Propaganda by Jacques Ellul. Jacques also wrote, in French it's called La Technique, but in English it's translated as The Technological Society. I haven't read all of that one, just bits. But this book, Propaganda, I think is useful for developing an understanding of that I don't know what to call it, non-authoritarian totalitarianism comes to mind, but I think all those terms are kind of like, I don't even really want to use them, but I guess what I mean to indicate by that is like, we live in a society that is dominating our lives in a way where our culture is developing, and we are giving birth to new generations that grow up in this culture, are enculturated by this culture, socialized within this culture, and thus building the new culture. I feel like the slope that is on in our society is increasingly non-liberatory, or say like there's an emphasis on control, on domination, on limiting possibility, on... When I say control, I often think of it as I think of life as sort of a spontaneous and chosen thing. Like there's an element of choice and possibility and unpredictability to vital existence. And I think, especially after the World Wars, there's been a real tendency to clamp down on that concept for the sake of mitigating risk or control. Not mitigating control, but you control things so that you can mitigate risk. Say you don't want your population to revolt. Well, you set things up in a certain way where the populations and the culture that they're producing and the children that they're producing are going to live in a way that is in accord with the conditions that you need to sustain the power structure of that society. And similarly, post-World War II society has been highly economic supremacist, like lots of financial manipulation and increased speed and technological development, and lots of there's been a sucking away of assets from people into larger and larger asset managing companies and governments and corporations. So yeah, so I think this book is pretty good for getting a handle on how there can be dominating powers under the illusion of the concept of democracy. Because in the United States, there was a revolution, and then there was a very highly intellectual experiment in the possibility of a popular government. And so then you have the whole 1800s where that is like increasingly being degraded. And a lot of that degradation comes from media influence and wealth accumulation in certain hands that want to turn the society in certain directions. And yeah, and then you wind up in the 20th century where like the processes analyzed by things like psychoanalysis are better understood and can be technicized and used by advertising companies or used by governments to try to control social behavior a little bit more. Actually, I wasn't going to read this. That reminds me of a couple books that I'll pull out in case I want to read from them later. So we've got another book called Propaganda by Edward Bernays, Freud's nephew who lived in America, and also a book of American historical documents, because in George Washington's farewell address, he talks about the possibility of the decay of the society in this manner specifically. One element of it feels specific to me, to what I was just talking about. So, all right. So I want to dispel a little bit of the sense of the idea that we live in a democracy or in a free society. So as the 20th century develops, we are involved in a highly consumeristic and material culture where people's interior lives are being manipulated so as to get profits to move a certain way within that culture. So that's how. So by the time we get to the 21st century, like, these techniques are highly advanced, and that's a lot of my issue with the smartphone, is people are using them, but they don't realize how much goes into the way that the phone makes you want to use it, and also what the phone does to your interior life. And it makes you conform to a certain set of behaviors that are very acceptable to the dominant class. So, all right. Yeah, I guess that's a little bit of the picture. Because we've talked about this on the show a little bit, but what we want is not necessarily what we want. There is a lot going into this idea of this creation of our will, creation of desire. Children sitting in a grocery cart going down the aisle, they call out to a certain box because of how it's a box of cereal, say, to their parent because of how it's designed. That's not like in a sense, that's manufactured within them by the circumstances that they were put in. And the design of the box knows what people are like. It knows what children are like. And so it's specifically trying to reach that audience and affect that audience. And that child may remember that image for the rest of its life. That is the strange thing about human life, especially human life in such a highly image. I'm trying to avoid saying the word dominant again. But images are everywhere in our society. And so you may have images, you may have seen a Vine however many years ago, and it just lives in your psyche forever. You can bring it to life. They were roommates. There's so much that's in there. I did not ask for it to be in there. It may be in there till the day I die. Maybe in there when I'm 90 years old. So, there were memes about that, actually, or like just the meme of like, okay, grandma, but grandma's talking about like vines or something. Just like, this will be me when I'm 80. So that lives in the popular consciousness, but I think we need to bring out a little bit of clarity about the malicious intent, or rather, even if it's not malicious, some of it certainly is. It is not life affirming. It's not positive in that way. It's not trying to make people better or healthier or live in a way that is like conducive to creating a healthier society or a more convivial society in the Ivan Illich sense of the term. So yeah, so that's a little bit of background. And so I guess I'm going to flip this to a darker side now, where I think about the Atlantic slave trade, which is, to me, like, in the modern period, I feel like that seems like the ultimate evil. That seems, no one's asking me to compare them, seems more evil than the Holocaust. Just seems like that is such an insane thing that transpired when you look into the actual trafficking of people for slavery. during that whole period. So with that in mind as sort of this ultimate evil, and then thinking about how our society has developed, something like the United States society that we consider, or many people still consider to be like a relatively free, relatively, I mean, people say progressive, people say first world, or people say privileged. I kind of want to emphasize that those evil forces that exist in the worlds that were able to perpetuate something like the Atlantic slave trade, like that ultimate dehumanization of people, that ultimate rejection of the interior and exterior value of other people to within themselves, like as a singular being. Because obviously it is putting an external value on them, but that's not what I'm referring to. So yeah, that I don't think the forces that have led to those sorts of evil have gone away at all in our society. I think those forces are still very much moving within the world and could rear their head again in our now more technicized environment, our now more technologically advanced and temporally accelerated world. I don't think it's out of the question that something like that level of degradation of other human beings is out of the question. So with that, I'm going to read a chapter, or not a whole chapter. I'm going to read a few things from this book, Critique of Black Reason by, I don't know how to pronounce his name, Achille Mbembe. And that's kind of why I bring up the slave trade here, is he uses that as an example. And I haven't read this whole book. I've just read sections of it. I've read the introduction, and I've flipped open to a section that was just very totally relevant to the kind of stuff that I'm interested in. So that's all I'm aware of in this book so far. And I like that stuff. So he's kind of talking about like the concept of blackness as it existed during the Atlantic slave trade, and how that concept of blackness permitted the total degradation of the humanity of those individuals. And he is sort of like bringing that into our 21st century and saying like I'll read it, but there's sort of been a becoming black of the world that is happening, where now the way class has developed and the wealthiest people exist on the earth is now such that we are entering into an era where the possibility of that degradation of people is entering upon all of the powerless elements of our world. So I think that's pretty cool as a concept. And these readings are going to be, I mean, they're not long. They're like max 3 pages. But I'm not, I don't know. I don't know what it's like to listen to me read as another person. So I think I will. I mean, I could read like 6 pages. The thing is, I haven't reviewed this in a while, and I would like to keep it relevant. So I may try to kind of skim or jump around. But here's the ending of this section, and then I will go back and read a little bit of this section. But he talks about, this is in the introduction. Now, for the first time in human history, the term black has been generalized. This new fungibility, this solubility, institutionalized as a new norm of existence and expanded to the entire planet, is what I call the becoming black of the world. And so he leads up to that with a little bit of a description of the world. And I mean, I don't know. I mean, you guys can weigh in on the chat. Like, if you think I'm reading too much, just let me know. But I think I'll just read this whole section, and then we can talk about the protests later. But I mean, here's the thing about this book. He's definitely in some kind of like postmodern continental philosophy tradition, and sometimes I'm kind of like rolling my eyes at the word choices, but you know, that's just it's just not my style, and that's okay. Sometimes it works. I like a lot of what he says in the sections that I've read here. But there have been other sections of the book where I'm a little bit like, you know, did we really have to describe it that way? And but that's why it's a conversation. So I'm sure I'm not treating these things with the best articulation, with the articulation that they deserve or anything. And hopefully you guys can fill me in on that in the future and help me articulate things better. Like my friend correcting my War of 1812 takes the other day. So here, let's I'll cut to where he's just talking about this third moment that we're in. He's talking about like 3 moments with respect to the concept of blackness. I'll cut to the one that we're in, the becoming black of the world sort of phase. So the third moment, the early 21st century, is one marked by the globalization of markets, the privatization of the world under the aegis of neoliberalism, and the increasing imbrication of the financial markets, the post-imperial military complex, and electronic and digital technologies. By neoliberalism, I mean the phase in the history of humanity dominated by the industries of the Silicon Valley and digital technology. In the era of neoliberalism, time passes quickly and is converted into the production of the money form. Capital, having reached its maximum capability for flight, sets off a process of escalation. The vision that defines the neoliberal moment is one according to which all events and situations in the world of life can be assigned a market value. The process is also characterized by the production of indifference, the frenzied codification of social life according to norms, categories, and numbers, the various operations of abstraction that claim to rationalize the world on the basis of corporate logic. Capital, notably finance capital, is haunted by a baneful double and defines itself as unlimited in terms of both ends and means. It does more than just dictate its own temporal regime. Having taken as its responsibility the fabrication of all relations of filiation, it seeks to reproduce itself on its own in an infinite series of structurally insolvent debts. There are no more workers as such. There are only laboring nomads. If yesterday's drama of the subject was exploitation by capital, the tragedy of the multitude today is that they are unable to be exploited at all. They are abandoned subjects, relegated to the role of a superfluous humanity. Capital hardly needs them anymore to function. A new form of psychic life is emerging, one based on artificial and digital memory and on cognitive models drawn from the neurosciences and neuroeconomics. With little distinction remaining between psychic reflexes and technological reflexes, the human subject becomes fictionalized as an entrepreneur of the self. Sorry about that. This subject is plastic and perpetually called on to reconfigure itself in relation to the artifacts of the age. By plastic, he means moldable. Like we're constantly, as things change, we are just kind of forced to go along with them. Like Guy Debord in Comments on Society of the Spectacle, which I read a little bit of the other day, talks about this feeling that we have that like everything has sort of just changed suddenly, and it's like a renewing feeling. I mean, he wrote that in 1989. I feel like it's happened many times since for people at a mass culture scale. Anyway, this new man, subject to the market and to debt, views himself as the simple product of natural luck. He's a kind of ready-made abstract form, characteristic of the civilization of the image and of the new relationships that it establishes between fact and fiction, and capable of absorbing any content. He is now just one animal among others, lacking an essence of his own to protect or safeguard. There are no longer any limits placed on the modification of his genetic biological structure. The new subject differs in many ways from the tragic and alienated figure of early industrialization. First and foremost, he is a prisoner of desire. His pleasure depends almost entirely on his capacity to reconstruct his private life publicly, to turn it into viable merchandise and put it up for sale. He is a neuroeconomic subject, absorbed by a double concern stemming from his animal nature, as subject to the biological reproduction of life, and his thingness, as subject to others' enjoyment of the things of this world. As a human thing, human machine, human code, and human influx, he seeks above all to regulate his behavior according to the norms of the market. He eagerly instrumentalizes himself and others to optimize his own pleasure. Condemned to lifelong apprenticeship, to flexibility, to the reign of the short term, he must embrace his condition as a soluble, fungible subject to be able to respond to what is constantly demanded of him, to become another. Moreover, in the era of neoliberalism, capitalism and animism, long and painstakingly kept apart from each other, have finally tended to merge. The cycle of capital moves from image to image with the new image. The cycle of capital moves from image to image with the image now serving as an accelerant, creating energy and drive. The potential fusion of capitalism and animism carries with it a number of implications for our future understanding of race and racism. First, the systematic risks experienced specifically by black slaves during early capitalism have now become the norm for, or at least a lot of, all of subaltern humanity. The emergence of new imperial practices is then tied to the tendency to universalize the black condition. Such practices borrow as much from the saving logic of capture and predation as from the colonial logic of occupation and extraction, as well as from the civil wars and raiding of earlier epochs. Wars of occupation and counterinsurgency aim not only to track and eliminate the enemy, but also to create a partition in time and an atomization of space. In the future, part of the task of empire will consist in transforming the real into fiction and fiction into the real. The mobilization of air power and the destruction of infrastructure, the strikes and wounds caused by military action, are now combined with the mass mobilization of images, a key part of the deployment of a violence that seeks purity. Capture, predation, extraction, and asymmetrical warfare converge with the re-balkanization of the world and intensifying practices of zoning, all of which point to a new collusion between the economic and the biological. Such collusion translates in concrete terms into the militarization of borders, the fragmentation and partitioning of territories, and the creation of more or less autonomous spaces within the borders of existing states. In some cases, such spaces are subtracted from all forms of national sovereignty, operating instead under the informal laws of a multitude of fragmented authorities and private armed forces. In other cases, they remain under the control of foreign armies or of international organizations operating under the pretext of or on the behalf of humanitarianism. Zoning practices are linked in general to transnational networks of repression whose tools and methods include the imposition of ideological grids on populations, the hiring of mercenaries to fight local guerrillas, the formation of hunt commandos, and the systemic use of mass imprisonment, torture, and extrajudicial execution. The imperialism of disorganization, which feeds on anarchy, leverages practices of zoning to manufacture disasters and multiply states of exception nearly everywhere. Foreign corporations, powerful nations, and local dominant classes all in turn present themselves as helping with reconstruction or use the pretext of fighting insecurity and disorder in order to help themselves to the riches and raw materials of countries thrown into chaos through zoning practices. The age has seen the massive transfer of wealth to private interests, increasing dispossession of the riches wrested from capital during the previous struggles, and indefinite payments of massive debt. Even Europe, struck by the violence of capital, has witnessed the emergence of a new class of structurally indebted people. The potential fusion of capitalism and animism presents a further implication, the very distinct possibility that human beings will be transformed into animate things made up of coded digital data. Across early capitalism, the term black referred only to the condition imposed on people of African origin. Different forms of depredation, dispossession of all power of self-determination, and, most of all, dispossession of the future, and of time, the two matrices of the possible. Now, for the first time in human history, the term black has been generalized. This new fungibility, this solubility, institutionalized as a new norm of existence and expanded to the entire planet, is what I call the becoming black of the world. So, yeah, wow, that's better than I remembered it. Yeah, good stuff. There's a couple things here on the following page. One more thing. Okay, so in addition to designating a heterogeneous, multiple, and fragmented world, ever new fragments of fragments, the term black signaled a series of devastating historical experiences, the reality of a vacant life, the fear felt by the millions trapped in the ruts of racial domination, the anguish at seeing their bodies and minds controlled from the outside, at being transformed into spectators watching something that was, but also was not, their true existence. I think in a very significant way, and this is part of what he's talking about here, like this is what we're all heading toward if we can't realize what we actually are and what is actually going into the generation of our subjectivity or the creation of our conscious being, because it's a complex world and it is really, I don't know, like I feel like the way that we're in an interesting position in this particular society as these people, because it's easy to ignore all of this and sort of engage in the constant consumption and entertainment and just like vapid lifestyle that has become associated with America. And yeah, I think, and yet all this violence plays out all around the world, and I think we're much closer to it than it feels. I think it's like, I always imagine it as two sides of the same coin, where we're on one side of the coin, we're in this like glossed up commodity version of life where we're being emptied of an interiority. And then on the other side is the actual hard power, physical violence playing out across the world. And there's interrelations there too, but anyway, but yeah, it's on the same side of a coin. The distance is nothing. You can poke a hole through it, and that's what I think about when this sort of violence happens, where there is an ICE shooting or the shooting at Brown or all this stuff. It's like, I said it last week on the show, where it's like we swim in this just like ocean of global violence that we're mostly unaware of until we get like splashed in the face with it. However, we're in it and the waves are taking us away and we're ultimately going to drown at some point. So, yeah, it's not to say not to mourn or take it seriously or be emotionally affected, but it is, I think it's a call to try your best to have a sense of generally what's going on in the world that competes and can challenge what he just laid out in the introduction, because that is abstract, there's ambiguities, and there's disagreements to be had. And I think we should all be striving to get to the point where we feel like we have a sharp enough picture of the world and specifically that which is expropriating our potential for political power from us as citizens and creating our subjectivity, creating our consciousness. That's what I would like. And there's one more little reading. This is just one page here. And again, I will do this little thing. Where I read a sentence from the end and then I read the paragraph. So, he says, the foundational events that were slavery, colonialism, and apartheid played a key role. They condensed and unified the desire of the black man to know himself and hold himself in the world. And he defines to know himself as the moment of sovereignty, and to hold himself in the world is the moment of autonomy. And that's something we lack in our society, and that's why we are so highly manipulable by media forces, because we're ultimately, our world is materially designed in a way where we're going to be channeled into certain lifestyles, like even just by the literal roads and the infrastructure and the institutions that we're put through. But much of it at this point is just mediated through digital content. It's mediated through TVs and phones. And that's something we have a power to reject and to know ourselves and to hold ourselves in the world. We are able to have a moment of sovereignty and autonomy. That is, I think, what I'm striving to find for myself and my viewers and my friends and my family and everybody is a little sovereignty and autonomy. So to cut back earlier in the paragraph, These events have acquired certain canonical meanings, 3 of which are worth highlighting. First, as we have suggested in the previous chapters, there is separation from oneself. Separation leads to a loss of familiarity with the self to the point that the subject, estranged, is relegated to an alienated, almost lifeless identity. In place of being connected to itself, which is another name for tradition, that might have shaped that experience, one is constituted out of an alterity in which the self becomes unrecognizable to itself. This is the spectacle of separation and quartering. I think that completely, that is an apt description of something, a common phenomena in our society. Second is the idea of disappropriation. This process refers, on the one hand, to the juridical and economic procedures that lead to material expropriation and dispossession, and on the other, to a singular experience of subjection characterized by the falsification of oneself by the other. What flows from this is a state of maximal exteriority and ontological impoverishment. These 2 gestures, material expropriation and ontological impoverishment, constitute the singular elements of the Black experience and the drama that is its corollary. Finally, there is the idea of degradation. Not only did the servile condition plunge the Black subject into humiliation, abjection, and nameless suffering, it also incited a process of social death, characterized by the denial of dignity, dispersion, and the torment of exile. So they condensed and unified the desire of the Black man to know himself, the moment of sovereignty, and hold himself in the world, the moment of autonomy. And we're all the Black man, according to the thesis I read earlier in there, or we all will be. Because the powers of capital, as they develop, slavery wasn't stopped for moral reasons. I don't want to be too abstract because ultimately I believe there's historical causes for all of these things, but I don't think if the most evil, powerful people had the technological means that they have today, they would have needed to cease slavery, or maybe they would have found alternative modes of slavery. And when I look around in my society and I see people participating in jobs just to get food, just to afford housing and get food, I see slavery. I see people who are 68 years old working at the dollar store, and they just look so broken. People are they're really like cogs in the machine. Or as Illich says in the quote I read yesterday, humans have become worn down mechanical parts. Anyway, so that's all the preamble, and I don't have a whole lot to say. Yeah, I'm also not sure what he was referring to with animism. I don't know. I also think I kind of have a sense of what he means, but I would definitely need to work that out on paper a little bit before talking about that. All right, so so with that as the preamble, the whole point of that is just to get a sense of where we really live, because I think it's easy to just get this sense that we're in a privileged first world society, but there are more insidious things going on the globe and within our society that I think that's a very limited way of understanding it. So I think a lot of people who are drawn to being overly vocal about sharing things on social media pertaining to ICE protest, or especially the Iran protest, because it's I would love to interview those people about what they think is going on in Iran. But that's that's it's the other side of the world, and Americans are not really known for their knowledge of geography, never mind history, and so yeah, I want to contextualize. I think we're in a dire situation that requires a certain type of reflection and a certain type of self-knowledge before we can actually have any sort of positive political consequence in the world. So when we are shocked by these things and we're called to protest, I think because it is shocking. I saw the video, it was shocking. It can I think it just plays with people in a weird way. Like there's a lot going on there, or like when you're at a protest and they're like beating drums and chanting slogans, and you're with a whole bunch of people for the first time and who knows how long, and you're all unified in a certain way. There's like a spiritual thing going on for people in that sort of like ritualistic tribal moment. And I think that I mean, I don't know exactly what's going on there, but when I witness that stuff, it seems like just like a lot of hurt and confused people. And look, I'm also not riffing on protest in general, or even like these protests in general. But I know I have friends who go to them, and like I know some of these friends are just kind of like sad people who have no idea what's going on, and they do want the connection, and they do want to feel like they're making themselves heard, and they want to listen, and they want to shout, and they want to hear the drums. And yeah, so I got a little ahead of myself here, because there's one more thing I want to talk about, which is that over the course of the 20th century, the 20th century was what a century for experimenting with techniques of quelling mass protest and mass repression, or exploring modes of mass repression. You've got the Vietnam protests in the U.S. You've got protests in China under Mao. You've got all kinds of like situations where governments were exploring techniques for control and for quelling protest and for satisfaction of the masses in certain ways, trying to get masses to do what you want. And then in like, I think in, I don't know, I would like to research stuff more before I bring up more examples, but the Rex 84 exercises come to mind, which I think it was in 1984, where there were military exercises being undergone for the hypothetical was basically like, well, what if a nuclear war does happen, or a global war does happen with the Soviet Union, and there's mass protests in the U.S. Like, how are we going to transfer all these people to prison camps? And so there were militias involved with government organizing to explore techniques for handling a situation like that. So all this stuff has been figured out, and also now we're just in like a much more intensely psychological realm. It's not even so much about material domination as much as preventing the need to ever do that. And I don't think we're out of the woods yet with that. I don't think there's I don't know. I guess we'll see if anyone ever actually creates a decent protest movement in our society. So yeah, I don't know. And in a way that is kind of like, in a way that's really just what I wanted to talk about here, is all that stuff. Like, not even really getting too much into the specifics of these protests. I guess the primary difference, since I'm lumping these two different things together because they show up similarly on social media through certain people acting as media vectors for it. And I guess fundamentally the situation with Iran is that, like, we don't live in, like, nations aren't not fucking with each other. Like, we live in such a, like, I don't know, the word paranoia is coming to mind. It's like paranoid, where like this stuff in Iran, there's certainly there are US and Israeli components that understand what is going on in Iran, or maybe have their hands in specifically funding what is going on in Iran. And they know more than we ever will about what is happening there. And I think you have to understand that there are global intentions behind lots of actors. I mean, corporations and nations. There's global intentions for what they want the world to look like in the year 3000. Some people think like that. Some people think 2050. There's lots of intent behind things that are going on. There's people high up in the U.S. government who want the situation in Iran to play out in a certain way. And we bombed Iran last year. There's I don't think that's over. I think this is like being closely monitored by U.S. and Israeli authorities, and I have not studied it, so I'm not going to speak on it too much. But the sort of like audacity of just random Americans to comment on that is strange to me. Like, I think we kind of have to be a little more humble in our projections about what is happening in global politics. So yeah, there's one more thing I think I wanted to say about that. I'll take a look. I guess maybe just that, like also say the government is overthrown in Iran, the next one could be horrible. Like that's the other thing that I don't understand about commentators here. It's like I don't know. I would not take that gamble. I would not I certainly wouldn't assume that is that's just going to make the conditions in the nation better for them, certainly, nor that the conditions in the world would be better for the world. I mean, that would sort of hand the Middle East over to Israel. And based on Israel's actions, that's not a world I would like to see. So I don't know. I think we have to understand that for global situations as well as for our own situation. And that's maybe a way to connect it to this ICE stuff. Like, ICE has been really confusing me this year because they are acting in a way that is like just so obviously creating extreme tension in an unnecessary manner too. Like, it just makes me wonder what the intentions even are behind this, because it seems like they care more about creating creating domestic drama and strife than about even deporting people. Like, it's some of the videos of their behavior is so like over the top that it's like almost like that's the point. The point is to create tension and outrage. So that is that concerns me because ICE is like a highly militarized police force and can be turned on anyone depending on who is in power. You could have that turned on any participant in the society in a state of exception situation, which I feel like I don't know. It feels like the state of exception never ended after COVID. So yeah, I think this will be a quick episode today. But there's one more little thing I'd like to bring into all this. Which is, I guess, just the importance of trying to wrap our heads around our position existentially and then politically in the world, because I feel like there is not enough of that. I feel like people really are not asking hard enough questions of themselves or of their friends, and we are just being like, we're just slipping into like total nightmare incoherence territory where people are barely able to communicate with each other, barely able to make sense of anything that's taking place around them, and that's going to be a disaster. Like, I don't know. There's a... Oh, yeah. So to connect this kind of to yesterday's stream was about quitting your phone and everything. And I think I brought up this idea of, like, who you are. Like, think of these terms as like hyphenated, like you with the phone and you without the phone. Most people have no idea who they are without the phone. Like, who am I without the phone? Who am I without the internet? Like, as a unit, because these things affect how we think. So if we are having our thoughts affected all the time in ways that we don't understand and that we can't undo, then we're losing ourselves. And we're losing ourselves, and we're being there's like a fake self being placed in its place. So I think it's very important to try to get a handle on who you are without the internet, who your friends are without the internet. And I'm not saying you have to fast from these things for a very long time, but I think fasting is required to start to get to know yourself, you without the phone, you in isolation, you as you are. Because the more years of your life that pass by where you use a phone every single day of the week, every week of the year, that is you are increasingly changing yourself. I won't say losing yourself because you're still you, but you are changing yourself in ways that you may not understand until much later, if ever. And I think personally, I want to know where my thoughts come from. I want to know what my desires are. I want to know what makes me uncomfortable. I want to know what I really want to do in the world. I want to know how certain people make me feel. I want to know how certain art makes me feel. And to do that, I kind of need to I don't know. I almost said desensitize, which is not right. It's but just detach myself from I want to say desensitize, but I want it to mean something else. I want it to mean like sensory deprive. But I want to increase the sensitivity of my senses. I want to stop the overstimulation, and I want to know why I believe the things that I do, because when we're in this highly mediated society for our entire lives, we lose track of why we believe the things that we believe. We lose track of who we are. We lose track of why we want what we want. And then we're highly manipulable people in a dangerous world. And I never want to get away from this fact that we are in a straight up dangerous, evil world. I don't know. The jury's out on how I feel about the inherent evilness of the world. Well, it's not that out, but because basically I want to warn against the idea of any sort of utopianism, or the idea that we can ever put the genie back in the bottle and figure all these things out. I just don't think that's possible. I think we live in a fallen world. Ultimately, we're like in a world of sin as one frame for understanding that. There's other frames you could use for that. But I do believe it's true, and I think we have to reckon with that. We always have to be looking at ourselves in the light of the facts that we exist in the world, and we have to think about ourselves accordingly, and think about, I don't know. That's kind of the gist of what I got right now. And tomorrow, I think I'm gonna try to recap some of what we've done here, because tomorrow will be episode 7, and the way this has been going is it's been like very explosive. It's just been, or just like in that the concepts wind up everywhere. It's not like it, I don't even mean it in an exciting way. I just mean it's it's a mess. So we're gonna pick up some of the concepts. We're maybe gonna organize them under certain umbrellas and just kind of start to pick up the pieces a little bit. So anyone else got anything going on? I'll hang around for another minute. If anyone's got anything to say in the chat, hit me up. And I'm trying to think if I had anything else to show you. I mean, there's like the quotes in here. They're interesting, but I mean, that was a lot of reading, so it is what it is. I mean, I think the first few paragraphs of this book by Bernays is just totally nuts. So, but it's not like super relevant. So I don't know. And the George Washington thing, like I'll be talking about George Washington. So, yeah. In other news, I don't know. I'm kind of thinking about converting to Catholicism because it seems true. And I went to a class on that on Wednesday for the first time. And I probably won't talk too much about, well, okay, yeah, I don't want to talk too much about my own personal experiences with it, but I will talk about religion for a second, just because, I got all this set up, and I'm probably not going to talk about religion tomorrow, so. And what I want to say about it is, because we are in because we're basically ungrounded intellectually and in every way, culturally, traditionally, in our society, and in a technicized and secular society, I think I experience in my conversations with my peers that they are like really incapable of answering certain questions for themselves and are kind of, but they are interested in getting there. It's sort of, I don't know. This comes with, I'm sort of thinking about specific sort of more hipstery peers, I guess. I don't know what it's like for everybody, but there's sort of this like lack of knowledge about everything, but also a rejection of Western religion. And I have found over the course of my life kind of taking this path through Taoism and reading the Quran into more familiarity with Christianity and Catholicism, where it's just interesting to me how intensely the questions of existence have been reckoned with for literally millennia in a certain specific framework. And I think that is very interesting. And I was reading a little bit of I don't think I have it here. I was going to read St. Augustine dialogue on the free choice of the will, but I just read I think it's the translator's introduction. And it was talking a little bit about this concept of learning from tradition, and then, or like kind of accepting things from tradition in childhood and then reckoning with them in adulthood. And like finding the disagreements and developing them over time once you are set and like creating the culture of your society. And yeah, I don't know. I just think that's interesting because that has basically been broken and replaced with a different type of like scientific and technological and like economy worshiping myth or religion. And I don't know. So that's just to share a little bit of another thing that's on my mind. So, yeah, I don't know. Well, if no one's got anything, I am going to call it here, and I will see you tomorrow for a recap. See you tomorrow, and have a good night.